In many parts of the world, if you're taking a stroll outside or driving your car around at nighttime, you're likely to be basked in the orange, peach, gold, yellow, whatever you want to call it, glow common in street lighting.
First, I would like to say that this video is not a critique of Alec from Technology Connections himself. Rather, it is an expansion of a topic covered by him in two popular videos. This topic expansion will be based on a wide variety of peer-reviewed papers and technical documents. A document containing a list of these sources can be found in the description. The focus of this video will be adding necessary context to the discussion of street lighting mechanics and human vision, rather than the technology of sodium lights themselves. We will skip to the 8-minute mark of video number 1, where these mechanics are first mentioned.
Some of that has to do with the sodium D line, that's the main yellow spectral emission closely matching the peak sensitivity of the cells in our eyes, but only under photopic daylight conditions. This gets kinda complicated and we'll get into it, but the peak sensitivity of the average human eye is 555 nanometers, and the HPS lamp's peak output of 589 isn't far off. But don't fixate on that too much, because, spoiler alert, this turns out to be a bad thing.
Alec is right. The issue of spectral sensitivity within human vision gets complicated. Throughout these two videos, Alec will present information on spectral sensitivity that, while true, is missing important context on how human vision functions in an artificially illuminated environment at night. We will dive into the science on this issue, its research origins, and the additional research needed in order to apply it to the real world, as Alec presents this topic in more detail in his second video.
Now, of course, there are disadvantages to large amounts of street lighting, which we'll get to. But assuming safety is the goal, are sodium lamps good? Well, no, not really. Remember how I said that the sodium D line is close to our eye's peak sensitivity, but only under photopic daylight conditions? Well, it turns out that our eyes see quite differently at night than during the day. Under nighttime scotopic lighting conditions, our eyes actually see bluish light better.
Again, Alec is right. The human eye has a peak sensitivity within the bluish-green range of the visible spectrum under scotopic lighting conditions.
And that makes sense. After all, moonlight and starlight are pretty bluish, so under these dimly lit conditions, having a greater sensitivity to blue light would mean we can see better. Under scotopic lighting conditions, only the rod cells in our eyes are activated. Rod cells cannot distinguish color, but they are much more sensitive to light than the cone cells. The peak sensitivity of the rod cells is around 498 nanometers, which is a green-blue color.
This is where missing information begins to pose an issue. Alec is right that rod cells do not perceive color and are more sensitive to light than cone cells under scotopic adaptation conditions. The differences between cone cells and rod cells do not end here, however, as rod cells have a very different visual capability than what we are used to with our cone cells. When examining visual acuity, a measure of how sharp our vision is, pure scotopic vision mediated by rod cells alone leaves us clinically blind. Our vision is essentially reduced to colorless shapes, giving us the ability to avoid bumping into nearby objects and not much more. Additionally, worth noting is that rod cells and cone cells do not inhabit the eye equally. Cone cells make up the center of our visual field, an area known as focal vision. The majority of our visual tasks are accomplished in this area. Rod cell placement becomes denser as cone cells become less numerous towards the edge of our visual field. While the region of focal vision is relatively narrow, its effective size is increased through saccadic eye movements. These eye movements happen several times per second, scanning an object or area of interest, such as a book.
Now, of course, under street lighting, our cone cells are still active. We can, after all, see colors and are not exclusively using the rod cells. This dim but not quite dark lighting scenario is often called mesopic vision, a mix of the two. Still, stimulation to the rod cells will be far more visible and is more important.
This is perhaps the most widespread misconception about roadway lighting. There are two main factors that need to be broken down here. First is visual adaptation. Visual adaptation is the process of our eyes adjusting to different levels of luminance. The process of visual adaptation varies between cone cells and rod cells. This becomes very important in our artificially lit nighttime world. In our nighttime world, there is rarely an illuminated surface without a visible light source. For drivers, there are often dozens of streetlights and other outdoor light sources within the visual field, as well as oncoming headlights. These light sources have a significant impact on visual adaptation that is often left out of the equation. This adaptation issue is further compounded by differences in how cone cells and rod cells adapt to luminance levels within our visual field. Cone cells often reach their peak sensitivity to low levels of light within 5 minutes and reliably maintain that adaptation. Rod cells, on the other hand, don't surpass the minimum sensitivity of cone cells for over 5 minutes, with full adaptation to starlight taking as long as an hour. Rod cells undergo a process called bleaching after they are exposed to bright light. During bleaching, the photopigment within rod cells becomes transparent. This process happens almost instantly, and once completed leaves the rod cells unable to perceive light. After our rod cells are bleached, they must begin the lengthy process of adaptation all over again.
So then, how well does the light from sodium vapor lamps line up with our scotopic light sensitivity? Not well. This is the CIE 1951 scotopic luminosity function graph. The x-axis is the wavelength of light in nanometers, and the y-axis is the eye's relative sensitivity to these wavelengths under scotopic nighttime conditions. As you can see, peak sensitivity is around the 500 nanometer mark. And where's the wavelength produced by a sodium vapor discharge? It's about here, 589 nanometers. The rod cells are barely activated by a sodium discharge. While the discharge may be extremely efficient at producing visible light, at nighttime this light is fundamentally misaligned with our eye's sensitivity. See, if you look at the response curves of scotopic and photopic conditions together, you can see that the sodium discharge lines up great with our photopic vision. But when our eyes are adjusted to nighttime lighting conditions, it's actually pretty bad. This is why focusing on the sodium D-line emission's seemingly perfect alignment with our vision is somewhat of a farce. While it's true during the day, it's literally quite far from the truth at night.
In a vacuum, Alec is right. The spectral content of a sodium light provides little stimulation to our rod cells. As we have just seen, however, there is a large gap between nighttime scotopic lighting conditions and roadway lighting conditions when it comes to visual adaptation. Roadways are typically lit to luminance levels ranging from 0.3 candela per square meter in residential areas all the way to 2 candela per square meter on large, high-traffic roads. Research conducted both for European and North American roadway lighting standards shows that the advantages for blue light in visual performance end at 0.6 candela per square meter. Additionally, this advantage only exists for peripheral visual tasks. For visual tasks in the center of our visual field at all roadway lighting levels, the spectral efficiency of different colors aligns with the photopic curve, peaking in the yellow range. We will take a closer look at this research soon. This is a reflection of the eye's structure we touched on earlier, where yellow-sensitive cone cells form the center of our visual field, and blue-sensitive rod cells are found away from the center to form our peripheral vision.
Aside from the simple spectral misalignment of the sodium lamp, research shows that people can indeed see better under light sources with a bluer spectral content. In Peter Morante's research for the Lighting Research Center at the Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute, link below, survey respondents strongly preferred the light from a 6500K correlated color temperature light source over that of high-pressure sodium, with metrics of visibility, brightness, safety and security, color rendering, and overall preference all favoring the newer light source, which also used only 55% of the energy of the high-pressure sodium lamps it replaced. The study, which by the way is really comprehensive and worth taking a look at, was done in 2008, which was a tad before LED technology became economically viable. The study compared induction lighting, which is sort of like fluorescent lighting and worth a video on its own one day because it's pretty neat if not so practical any longer, as well as metal halide lighting to the sodium lamps for the purpose of creating a recommendation to a local utility company.
While this study is lengthy in its review of roadway lighting, it is entirely composed of survey results that are both subjective and, aside from aesthetic preference, hold little weight in evaluating light sources. Despite the limited value of these survey conclusions, we will still give them a closer look. In roadway lighting transitions, there is one factor that remains both important and overlooked, even by lighting research centers. Luminaire dirt depreciation is the industry term for light fixtures, losing light output as they accumulate dirt. There could not be a simpler concept within roadway lighting than accounting for the fact that a piece of glass gets dirty after being outside for decades. However, it is rarely considered when old sodium lights are replaced. In the case of roadway lighting, fixtures lose 4% of their light output annually under standard conditions. This value can be much higher for dirtier operating areas. With the transition to sodium lighting beginning during the late 1960s, many of the light fixtures seen in this study could have been 40 years old. When examined closely, sodium light fixtures often contain physical piles of dirt and, during the day, let little sunlight through them. Imagine how much dimmer the inside of a building would look during the day if its windows were this dirty. Another simple factor is the aging of light bulbs. Like any other form of lighting, sodium light bulbs lose light output as they age. Sodium bulbs often lose 20% of their light output before burning out. Improved sodium bulbs developed later minimized this loss to as little as 5%, however. While this study could be summarized as new light bulbs within new fixtures appear brighter than old light bulbs within old fixtures, there is also some psychological factors worth examining. The perception of brightness within human vision rarely, if ever, is an accurate representation of luminance. Luminance, measured in candela per square meter, is a metric of light levels originating from a surface as perceived by our eyes. Our perception of brightness, however, is largely determined by luminance contrast within the visual field, as well as glare. With the luminance of both a sodium and an induction bulb exceeding what we can adapt to and perceive, luminance contrast rests on the darker areas of the visual field. In this case, the lower levels of surface luminance produced by the induction fixture can cause people to perceive the light itself as brighter, especially if they are not carefully trained to focus on the roadway surface when remembering their perception of brightness. The additional glare produced by a bluer source of light will also lead to increased perceptions of brightness. We will look closely at the mechanics behind glare later.
The conclusion was that metal halide didn't make sense due to higher maintenance costs, but induction would make tons of sense. But I also liked this final recommendation. White light-emitting diodes should be considered as replacements for HPS street lighting in about 3 years' time when their efficacy is higher and their cost has reached reasonable levels to be economically viable. Groton Utilities may want to consider postponing decisions on street light replacements until white LEDs become economically available. Well, it's been about 10 years since that study, and LEDs are economically viable. In fact, they've become incredibly economically viable. But before we move on to them, let's go over the main issue once more. Because of the spectral misalignment of the sodium vapor lamp with our scotopic and mesopic light sensitivity, it takes more light output from a sodium lamp to produce the same visible light level from a bluer light source. In fact, Dr. Alan Lewis of the New England College of Optometry measured individuals' response time to a hazard approaching from the sides and found that in well-lit areas, such as a major motorway, a high-pressure sodium light system needs to produce 3.9 times as much light as a metal halide source to achieve the same response time. The effect is even greater in dimly lit areas, where he found that 7.8 times as much light from high-pressure sodium was required to match response time under cooler metal halide light sources. So it seems as though the high-pressure sodium light is less efficient than it appears on paper, and that roadway safety is greatly increased when light sources are used that are tuned to our scotopic and mesopic light sensitivity.
Dr. Alan Lewis's research is part of a long line of studies investigating differences in visual performance at mesopic light levels when using different colors of light. These studies primarily fall under two organizational umbrellas, the Illuminating Engineering Society of North America and the International Commission on Illumination. A common trait between the vast majority of these studies, including those of Dr. Alan Lewis, is that the studies are performed in tightly controlled laboratory conditions. While these laboratory tests produce accurate results within a vacuum, there are multiple barriers between their results and real-world lighting applications. Firstly, and unique to the research of Dr. Alan Lewis, a Maxwellian viewing display is used to project the test scene onto the subject's eyes. What makes this testing method significant is the factor of post-illumination pupil response, the mechanism of our pupil narrowing after exposure to bright light. When post-illumination pupil response is tested, bluer sources of light have a much greater impact on pupil diameter than warmer sources of light. Not only do bluer sources of light cause the pupil to narrow to a smaller size, but their narrowing impact has a much greater duration. This means that bluer sources of light, such as those found in a standard roadway LED, darken our vision to a much greater extent than warmer sources such as sodium vapor would. There is even a significant difference in pupil darkening between incandescent and high-pressure sodium lighting, despite incandescent being a relatively warm source of light. Returning to the research of Dr. Alan Lewis, a Maxwellian viewing display projects the testing image directly onto the subject's retina. The image entering the subject's eye is focused in a way as to bypass the effects of post-illumination pupil response. This bypassing of pupil response differences is not something that happens in the real world and poses an issue when applying the test results to a real-world lighting situation. As for the 7.8 times difference in lighting levels required, let's look at how these numbers are achieved. Dr. Alan Lewis used 3 different tests in his study, including a test that he designed to be more representative of a realistic situation than the other 2 tests. In this test, subjects were asked to identify whether the projected image of a woman was facing towards or away from a road. The goal of this experimental setup was to test the reaction time in determining whether a pedestrian was about to cross the road or not. 4 levels of luminance were used in this test, ranging from 0.1 to 10 candela per square meter. The difference in reaction time between metal halide and high-pressure sodium is 15% at a luminance of 1 candela per square meter. This increases to 30% at 0.1 candela per square meter. At higher luminance levels, there was no meaningful difference in reaction time. So how exactly does this translate into a 780% difference between metal halide and high-pressure sodium, as referenced by Alec? The metric used to determine differences in spectral performance is not reaction time itself, but the amount of light required to achieve a target reaction time. In this case, 780% more light is required to fill that 30% gap in reaction times we saw earlier. So, how applicable is this number to the real world? To answer that, we have to revisit visual adaptation. As we can recall from earlier, visual adaptation is the process of our eye adjusting itself to different levels of light. The lowest level of luminance used in Dr. Alan Lewis's research, 0.1 candela per square meter, is much lower than the minimum luminance level used on roadways, 0.3 candela per square meter. The next level of luminance tested by Dr. Alan Lewis, 1 candela per square meter, is much higher than the 0.3 candela per square meter target of roadway luminance. To fill this gap, we will explore additional research conducted a decade later by the International Commission on Illumination. The Mesopic optimization of visual efficiency, shortened to MOVE, resulted from a series of laboratory experiments conducted with the goal of creating a model representing the efficiency of different colors of light within human vision at mesopic levels. The MOVE model tested several factors of visual performance, including the ability to detect a visual target, the time it takes to react to a visual target, and the identification of a visual target. These studies were designed to answer the same question posed by Dr. Alan Lewis, but on a much larger scale. The MOVE studies examined a wider range of luminance levels, including the 0.3 candela per square meter target of minimum roadway lighting. Additionally, these studies tested both focal and peripheral vision to provide a better understanding of lighting impacts. Similar to the results of Dr. Alan Lewis, a peripheral reaction time test for the MOVE model at 0.1 candela per square meter shows that the Scotopic visual efficiency curve, mediated by rod cells, is a better predictor for visual performance than the Photopic curve, mediated by cone cells. However, at 0.3 candela per square meter, reaction time results are equally aligned with the Photopic and Scotopic curve. By 1 candela per square meter, peripheral reaction time results are significantly more aligned with the Photopic curve. There is a catch to all of these studies, however, a significant barrier between their results and real-world lighting applications. During testing for these studies, subjects were not exposed to luminance levels higher than what was being tested. Additionally, subjects were given as long as 30 minutes to adapt to the luminance level being tested. In the real world, people are exposed to bright sources of light in artificially illuminated nighttime environments. LED streetlight fixtures easily exceed 100,000 candela per square meter of source luminance, far greater than the highest value of 10 candela per square meter being tested in laboratories. The International Commission on Illumination conducted additional research as part of their effort to apply their MOVE model to the real world, creating a primitive simulation of visual adaptation. This simulation included two shortcomings in estimating visual adaptation. Firstly, it defines an area of measurement on the ground based on an assumption that pedestrians and drivers will reliably keep their vision focused in this area. Secondly, its low-resolution imagery was unable to capture the luminance of a light source, its imaging system peaking at 10,000 candela per square meter. Despite these shortcomings that lead to underestimating visual adaptation, the study found a significant difference between surface luminance and adaptation luminance. In his technical guide to roadway lighting, Professor Wout van Bommel recommends that roadway luminance values be increased by at least 25% to achieve the adaptation luminance of the scene. Based on the reaction time study conducted for the MOVE model, this consideration for visual adaptation brings even the dimmest roads at 0.3 candela per square meter closer to the Photopic curve than the Scotopic curve. This, however, is still an incomplete image of visual adaptation. Recalling from earlier in this video, cone cells and rod cells differ in their adaptation mechanics. Rod cells experience a process known as bleaching when exposed to bright sources of light, rendering them incapable of contributing to visual performance. Roadway light sources, often exceeding 100,000 candela per square meter, are bright enough to significantly, if not completely, bleach the rod cells of our eyes. When the impact of oncoming headlights is considered, it is virtually impossible for our rod cells to adapt and contribute to visual performance. This leaves us with our cone cells, represented by the Photopic curve.
It's looking pretty bad for high-pressure sodium, but there's one thing that HPS technology doesn't do that bluer light sources might. That, my friends, is circadian rhythm disruption. Research has suggested that the color of light we are exposed to has a great impact on what time our biological clocks think it is. The shorter wavelength of daylight sun and blue sky may help keep us awake by suppressing melatonin production, and the long wavelength light of the sunset may signal our bodies to sleep by allowing melatonin to seep into our bloodstreams. To help us understand the impact different light sources can have on circadian rhythm disruption, light sources are characterized by their melanopic content. There's a great source from the US Department of Energy linked down below which goes over this in much greater detail, but as a general overview, with high-pressure sodium technology normalized at 1 for both scotopic light content and melanopic light content, a metal halide lamp with a color temperature of about 4000 K will have about 2.5 to 2.8 times as much scotopic light content, but also produces 3.16 to 3.75 times as much melanopic light content. If you look at the various color temperatures of LED light sources, you can see that as the color temperature increases, both scotopic light content and melanopic light content increase. However, melanopic light content increases at a greater rate than scotopic light. What this means is there's a trade-off, and it's complicated. The higher the color temperature, the more scotopic light it produces, which means you could use less light and thus less energy to get the same perceived brightness and safety levels. But because melanopic light content increases at a greater rate, although you may need less light of a higher color temperature, it will disrupt circadian rhythm to a greater extent. You can see that high-pressure sodium has among the lowest melanopic light content of any light source, with only amber LEDs and low-pressure sodium producing less melanopic light. So then, we're presented with a choice. We can clearly use less energy and expect a safer nighttime driving experience with light sources of higher color temperatures, but this may cause unwanted side effects that sodium lighting largely doesn't.
As we have just seen, there is no trade-off in reality. The mechanics of visual adaptation make use of our rod cells unreliable at best in artificially illuminated nighttime environments. What is reliable, however, is the wide range of biological damage caused by light sources with high levels of melanopic content. It is a common misconception that the impacts of blue-rich light pollution are limited to sleep rhythms. The impacts of blue-rich light pollution go much deeper than a mere loss of sleep. Chronobiology is the field of research examining biological rhythms. Chronobiologists, along with researchers within other fields of biology, have long studied the impacts of light pollution. Over the last 2 decades, there has been a rapidly growing body of research examining the impacts of artificial lighting on ecosystems, as well as human health. The primary mechanism of light interference within biology is the suppression of pineal melatonin secretion. Pineal melatonin secretion happens during the dark phase of day and night cycles and is suppressed by light. The suppression of pineal melatonin secretion is controlled by a third type of photoreceptor within our eyes, the non-image forming photoreceptor. Unlike cone cells and rod cells, non-image forming photoreceptors do not contribute to our vision. Instead, they act as a daylight sensor to tell our body whether it is day or night via suppression of pineal melatonin secretion. As Alec has stated, the peak sensitivity of non-image forming photoreceptors is within the blue range of visible light. A wide range of bodily functions, both in humans and the broader animal kingdom, rely on this detection of daylight. Firstly, melatonin is a powerful antioxidant responsible for fighting hormonal cancers, such as hormonal breast cancer and prostate cancer. Several experiments were conducted on rodents, where a hormonal cancer tumor would be implanted into the rodent. Rodents were separated into multiple groups. Some groups experienced regular day-night cycles, including a dark period. Other groups experienced brief interruptions to the dark period via an artificial light, while others received no dark period at all. The results of multiple studies consistently found that tumor growth was inhibited in rodents that experienced melatonin secretion during a dark period. On the other hand, rodents that either had their dark period interrupted or no dark period at all experienced much greater tumor growth. While this kind of experiment can't be conducted on humans for obvious reasons, we can still see the signs of hormonal cancer development being driven by blue-rich light pollution within the human population. Shift workers, experiencing regular disruptions to their sleep schedule for years on end, are at higher risk for hormonal cancers. This led to the World Health Organization declaring that shift work is a potential carcinogen in 2007. More recently, and specifically, a population-level study published in 2018 found a strong correlation between blue-rich light pollution and hormonal cancer rates. This study, focused on the LED streetlight transition of Los Angeles beginning in 2009, constructed a synthetic control group. This control group consisted of populations that did not transition to LED roadway lighting, but matched the Los Angeles population in other metrics of health and life. What's important to note here is that the development of hormonal cancer has a latency period believed to span between 2 and 16 years. Due to the data availability during this study and the relatively recent nature of LED transitions, only a 5-year period was studied after the LED transition began. This means that the increase in cancer rates found during this time are set to increase as cases develop, and more blue-rich light is added to the nighttime world. The study went a step further and compared the economical impact of these increased cancer rates to the energy savings achieved by Los Angeles's LED transition. This analysis found that the economic costs of increased cancer rates significantly outweighed any savings achieved by LED lighting, not to mention the loss of human life. Another impact of blue-rich light pollution is stress. Research has found that exposure to blue-rich light during the biological dark period is a stressor of organisms through means other than melatonin suppression. A similar study to the cancer growth experiments conducted on rodents found that exposure to artificial light during the biological dark period led to an increase in stress hormones. In a study conducted on chickens, a flash of light given to the chicken habitat near the end of night activated the same genes that respond to heat shock. In another study conducted on rodents, several groups of mice were exposed to light during their biological dark period. Examination of the rodent's organs found stress protein levels were significantly elevated in the brains and livers of mice that experienced brief disruptions to their dark period from artificial light. This kind of stress, along with increased oxidative stress caused by the suppression of melatonin, leads to the general decline of an organism's health caused by exposure to blue-rich light pollution at night.
And this is completely ignoring aesthetic preferences. I myself generally detest cooler lighting as I find it harsh and unpleasant, but I can acknowledge its safety advantages. In my area on Interstate 88, many of the roadway lights have been changed from high-pressure sodium to LED. The change is dramatic, with visibility greatly enhanced once under the cooler light. As much as I don't like the color, I can tell that it's a lot safer.
While we can't objectively say why Alec feels this way, we can refer to previously mentioned factors such as Luminaire dirt depreciation and the loss of light output as a sodium bulb ages. George Liv, a researcher of light pollution and outdoor lighting, measured the illuminance levels below old and new sodium light fixtures. Despite all fixtures using 150-watt bulbs, the ground below new fixtures was nearly 3 times brighter than the ground below old fixtures. While we can't know for certain what condition the old sodium fixtures in Alec's video are in, it's possible that replacing them with new sodium fixtures would have produced much brighter results than replacing them with LED fixtures. Alternatively, new sodium fixtures of a lower wattage could have replaced the older sodium fixtures to save energy while still increasing observed light levels. Many municipalities, including the city of Calgary, did just that during the early 2000s. Energy savings were significant. For example, old 150-watt fixtures were replaced with new 100-watt fixtures to achieve a 33% reduction in energy usage within that lighting class.
Visibility in my periphery is tremendously better, and I'm certain these new lights are using less energy than those they replaced.
The improved peripheral vision in this case is simply a result of the LED fixtures being new. Luminaire dirt depreciation impacts the edges of a light fixture's output more than the inner region of its output, leading to dark spaces between light fixtures and the outside lane being poorly lit. Again, this problem could have been solved with new sodium light fixtures. The improved lighting under the LED fixtures is not a result of transitioning to LEDs, as they will suffer the same issues as old sodium fixtures in the coming decades.
Before I move into the conclusion of this video, let's discuss the issue of light pollution. Light pollution is exactly what it sounds like: excess light in our environment that is irritating, unnecessary, poorly distributed, or in general, unwanted. Outdoor lighting is by far the most prolific source of light pollution, and it has gotten so bad that people living anywhere near a city can barely see the night sky. There's even an anecdote about a widespread blackout in Los Angeles causing many panicked 911 calls from lifelong residents who had never seen the Milky Way before and were a little scared of it. Light pollution is a complicated problem, but the LED may actually help to solve it. Now, to be clear, the solutions I'm about to offer aren't exclusive to LEDs, but the way light is emitted from an LED chip makes controlling it relatively easy. So first, let's discuss one of the biggest causes of light pollution: lights that point up. This is less obvious than it seems, but it's incredibly important. Right outside my apartment are drop lens Cobra luminaires containing high-pressure sodium lights. Because the lens protrudes downward from the fixture, a lot of light escapes to the sides and indeed upwards. I'm on the 4th floor of my building and my eye level is above these streetlights, but I can still see the source of the light. This is not ideal for a number of reasons. First, a lot of light is being wasted by lighting up things that are not the road. That's kind of dumb. But secondly, a lot of this light is going up into the sky. Granted, this style of fixture isn't the worst offender, but a better design would be a flat lens that does not allow light to escape above the horizontal. This may still throw light farther to the sides than necessary, but none of it will end up lighting the sky. The worst offenders for this kind of light pollution are lights that illuminate buildings by shining upwards, wall pack lights without shielding, and these decorative fixtures. I'll admit they're pretty, but they're really wasteful.
What Alex says here is right. However, there is additional information to be considered. The kind of drop lens fixture outside of Alex's apartment isn't a simple piece of glass. Drop lens fixtures use a carefully designed refractive lens that directs light output into a targeted area. While the lens of these fixtures is visible from above, only a very small portion of their output actually escapes upwards thanks to the refractive lens. Additionally, these drop lens fixtures have a unique advantage. Their refractive lens obscures the sodium bulb within the fixture, greatly reducing the visual intensity of the light and reducing eye strain. It also has to be noted that light escaping directly into the sky is not the only source of light pollution. We will get to that in a moment.
Recently, I was on an airplane flying into Chicago at night. I took some videos as we landed, and you can see the difference between a well-managed light and a poorly managed light. This roadway is lit well. I cannot see the actual light sources. I can only see the reflected light from the road. That's what we want. As we got closer to the airport, these neighborhoods had tons of lights that were visible from above. Much of the light produced by these lamps is shining into the sky and being wasted. I should not be able to see the actual light source from an airplane, yet I can. This is contributing to sky glow. Sky glow is what makes the night sky hard to see when you're close to a city. This is probably the most widespread light pollution problem, and while it's not caused exclusively by poorly designed fixtures, they are a major component. But once again, the solutions to sky glow are complicated, largely because light sources that cause the least amount of sky glow are high and low pressure sodium. In fact, low pressure sodium is used widely around large astronomical observatories because their nearly monochromatic light output can easily be filtered out, eliminating any sky glow they create. I saw a large number of people saying that high pressure sodium can also be filtered out, but I don't think that's true due to the pressure broadening and their spikier output. Someone correct me if I'm wrong, but I could only find references to low pressure sodium being used around observatories. Anyway, where it gets tricky is that an LED light source has about 3 times as much sky glow impact than a high pressure sodium light. But also you need less of it, so perhaps the sky glow impact is similar. In addition, the sky glow impact of incandescent lighting is barely higher than low pressure sodium. So it could be that LED street lighting correlated to a 2700 K color temperature causes less sky glow than high pressure sodium, but I think further research needs to be done there.
Responding to Alex's question, low-pressure sodium was indeed used exclusively around observatories and dark sky reserves when minimizing light pollution was the primary goal. While high-pressure sodium wasn't optimal for this use, the majority of its light output being confined to the yellow-amber range means that most of its light pollution can still be filtered out. With the onset of LEDs, this kind of filtering is now impossible. Not only has the spectrum of light pollution become much broader, but the range of LED color temperatures means that the spectrum of light pollution is no longer consistent. Expanding on the issue of sky glow, there are 2 additional factors that need to be considered here. Firstly, a major contributor to sky glow is the reflection of light off of illuminated surfaces. This contributor to sky glow cannot be eliminated and varies with weather conditions. In places that experience snowy winters such as Canada, the ground can be covered in snow and ice for nearly half of the year. This turns the ground into a giant mirror, reflecting roadway lighting into the sky. This image was taken while visiting Elk Island National Park in December. Elk Island National Park is a 45-minute drive away from the nearest major city and is marketed as a dark sky preserve. On this night, however, there was enough light pollution that I could have read a book without any extra source of light. The only way to mitigate the damage from this kind of light pollution is through controlling the spectral output of outdoor lighting, as we are about to see. The second additional factor contributing to light pollution is atmospheric scattering. Rayleigh scattering is the physics principle of short wavelengths of light, scattering more than long wavelengths of light within small particles and molecules. Notice in this image how the bluish LED lights are creating a visible cloud of scattered light, while the sodium lights aren't. In another example of Rayleigh scattering, we can see the output of this white headlight being divided. The blue light is being scattered within the atmosphere, creating a visible beam. The warmer light is passing through the atmosphere with less scattering, arriving at the hillside to illuminate it. As we can see, a warmer source of light, such as sodium vapor, produces less light pollution through atmospheric scattering. Additionally, when this warmer light does enter the environment, it causes less damage to the ecosystem, as we saw earlier with melatonin disruption.
In any case, what makes LEDs potentially much better at reducing sky glow is the optical systems that can be combined with them. Early LED fixtures may have used a large number of small 1-watt LEDs and tiny lenses to direct their light. Some really bad designs may have simply had an exposed chip, providing little directional control. You still see this a lot in cheap floodlight fixtures. But newer fixtures like these from Cree will use large chip-on-board emitters like these 10-watt chips, but larger. And because they only emit light in one direction, it's very easy to control their output with a lens. You can see on the spec sheet that there are 5 lenses in total, though larger fixtures have more. Most importantly, the optic system is customizable. Depending on fixture height and spacing, you may need a wider spread of light or a shorter one. Due to the customizable optics, you can get wonderfully consistent lighting on a road surface such as this area here. This may also help prevent light pollution because less overall light is needed. The hot spots of lights you see from above here mean some areas get too much light and others get too little. A more scotopic light source with better and more consistent control may not only reduce light pollution, but may use less energy and provide safer driving.
While LED streetlights in their current form are capable of tightly directed light output, the mechanism that enables this is also a disadvantage. Light intensity, the same thing as source luminance measured in candela per square meter, is a measure of light volume divided by area. As a reference, the limit for human visual comfort is approximately 300 candela per square meter. The limit for human visual tolerance is around 50,000 candela per square meter. LED chips created for use in headlights have already exceeded 10 million candela per square meter in source intensity. High-intensity sources of light translate directly to a hotspot of light on the retina, creating the possibility for retinal damage depending on the spectrum of light. The small nature of naked LED chips inherently makes them a high-intensity source of light. Additionally, they allow for lazy designs due to their flat surface. Traditional sources of light, such as incandescent or sodium vapor bulbs, emit light in a 360-degree radius. This forced engineers to use a variety of reflectors and lenses to direct the output of light fixtures, increasing the area of the light source and, in turn, reducing its intensity. LED chips, on the other hand, emit light in a 180-degree radius from their flat surface. This allows for naked LED chips with little control of light output to be sold as lighting fixtures, contributing to their inherent nature of being a high-intensity light source. Notice the huge difference in light output surface area between this drop lens sodium fixture and its replacement LED fixture. Despite producing less light, the LED fixture is an exponentially more intense source of light. We will now take this opportunity to discuss glare, something that Alec left out of his video. There are two types of glare that impact vision: disability glare and discomfort glare. Discomfort glare is a subjective sensation measured on the Debunking scale, ranging from barely noticeable to physical pain. A lower rating on the Debunking scale represents a stronger perception of glare. Discomfort glare is a considerable safety risk as it leads to glare aversion responses, such as a driver turning their head away from oncoming headlights. These responses lead to drivers and pedestrians looking away from their visual task to avoid discomfort, essentially blinding them to what they need to see. Disability glare is an objective measure of light scattering within the eye. This scattering creates a physical wall of light inside the eye, filling the visual field with a cloud of light that obstructs vision as seen in this example. This cloud of light is known as veiling luminance. Recall earlier how bluer sources of light scatter more within the atmosphere due to Rayleigh scattering. This same principle applies to light scattering within the eye. When discomfort and disability glare is tested, bluer sources of light produce significantly more glare than their warmer counterparts. Another leading factor in discomfort glare is the luminance intensity of a light source. As we have seen earlier, LEDs are inherently high-intensity sources of light. These factors make white LED streetlights a significant safety hazard due to their high level of glare output. Anyone who has driven at night knows just how bad LED lights can be. Many people no longer feel safe driving at night due to how often they are blinded by LEDs.
So then, we have a series of complicated choices to make. Sodium vapor lights are pretty efficient, have only a moderate contribution to sky glow, cause only minor circadian rhythm disruption, if any, and have a proven track record of reliability. But their color also makes them far less effective at improving safety, and due to the misalignment of their output with our scotopic light sensitivity, they require more light and thus use a lot more energy than a whiter light source. Perhaps less an issue, but still important, is that they contain both mercury and elemental sodium, meaning their disposal is far more dangerous and complicated. If we were to switch to a white LED source with a color temperature of about 5000 K, nighttime visibility would be greatly increased. Studies have shown that people see hazards far sooner under this light, and as the bluer wavelengths match our scotopic and mesopic color sensitivity more closely, we can use less of it while also achieving a greater safety benefit. This reduces the need for energy. However, this bluer light contributes more to circadian rhythm disruption and sky glow, but some of that is mitigated by the lower output required by these light sources. Still, many people may not find the aesthetics of this light source pleasing. One possible compromise would be to use a warmer color temperature LED light source. Data from the US Department of Energy tells us that a 3000K LED light would produce 1.89 to 2.39 times as much scotopic light as a high-pressure sodium lamp, while increasing melanopic content between 2.1 and 2.99 times. Because of its greater scotopic output, a 3000K LED replacement should only need to produce about half as much light as a high-pressure sodium lamp. This effectively cuts the circadian rhythm disruption potential in half too, placing it near about the same as high-pressure sodium. The greatest downside to using a warm color temperature LED is in their efficiency. The efficiency of these lights is very similar to that of an average high-pressure sodium lamp. At 67 lumens per watt, these 3000K LEDs are just slightly less efficient than the sodium lamp featured in my last video. Although you would need only about half as much light output, there are high-pressure sodium lamps which approach 150 lumens per watt. This would mean that a 3000K LED will use just about as much energy as a very efficient high-pressure sodium lamp. I'd still call that good, but it makes replacement less compelling. To normalize the effects of scotopic light content, I've multiplied the lumens per watt number by the scotopic light content for the following light sources. As you can see, the normalized efficiency of the LED goes up considerably as the color temperature does, due to both luminous efficiency and greater scotopic content. This is likely why most LED street lamp installations are done with the bluish 5700K and higher color temperatures. You can use the least amount of energy to produce the same amount of perceived brightness and safety. However, the normalized efficiency of even the 3000K LED is very similar to that of high-pressure sodium, and few HPS lamps actually output 150 lumens per watt. Also, the calculated lumens per watt of the LED is based on the input power of the fixture, so the losses in the ballast, which are fairly high for high-pressure sodium, aren't accounted for here.
This misconception, that light sources for outdoor lighting can be compared based on a raw, scotopic light multiplier, is by far the most prevalent and damaging falsehood within the realm of outdoor lighting. It's hard to blame Alec for making this comparison because of how widespread it is within the lighting industry. Originally done as a marketing scheme, this kind of comparison, commonly known as the scotopic to photopic ratio, has made its way into official lighting policy and media that did not intend to market LED lighting. Let's pretend that everything Alec has presented on mesopic vision and roadway lighting has been correct so far. Remember, roadway surfaces fall under the mesopic range of light. This range utilizes a varying degree of scotopic and photopic vision. The dimmest roadway surfaces, illuminated to 0.3 candela per square meter, fall on the photopic side of mesopic vision. In order to use a raw scotopic multiplier on a visual scenario, the eyes would have to be 100% within the scotopic end of vision. This is 300,000 times dimmer than the minimum roadway surface target of 0.3 candela per square meter. Pure scotopic vision is the kind of vision that one would use to avoid bumping into trees under starlight. Even a moonlit night is too bright for complete rod cell activation. Based on this factor alone, the adjustment of light sources by a raw scotopic multiplier is completely unfounded. Visual adaptation poses another issue to this kind of scotopic multiplication. As we can recall from earlier, rod cells are sensitive to bright sources of light and can be completely disabled within our artificially illuminated nighttime world. Any contributions they provide would be minimal and ultimately unreliable, making this kind of scotopic multiplication incompatible with human vision in any area these outdoor lights are employed. Finally, it is important to review the structure of our eye and the way in which mesopic vision is tested. Cone cells make up the center of our visual field and provide sharp color vision, known as focal vision. Rod cells make up the rest of our visual field and provide blurry, colorless vision. When mesopic vision is studied, the advantages for scotopic light only exist for peripheral tasks, as that region of our vision is provided mostly by rod cells. For tasks at the center of our visual field, there is no advantage for scotopic light as that area is inhabited by cone cells. Whenever a conclusion is reached that less light can be used based on its scotopic multiplier, that conclusion is only based on maintaining peripheral visual performance. When luminance levels are reduced, visual performance at the center of our visual field is reduced no matter what spectrum of light is used. In terms of driving, the City of Edmonton's light-efficient community policy states that these peripheral advantages are only relevant at speeds below 40 kilometers per hour, if at all. It was determined that, For faster driving conditions, no scotopic multiplier should be used as peripheral vision becomes less relevant at higher speeds, and focal vision becomes more important. In short, the use of a raw scotopic multiplier in marketing LED lights should be illegal. It is completely unfounded, and any science it claims to use is being used without context. This kind of marketing has serious risks both for safety and ecological health.
To conclude, although the high-pressure sodium light is very efficient, its primary output color is misaligned with our nighttime visibility. Only about a quarter of its light is actually effective at stimulating the cells in our eyes. Although the cool color temperature of many LED replacements is harsh and aesthetically displeasing, studies have shown that it is not only more efficient, but also makes driving at night safer. There is, however, the potential for greater circadian rhythm disruption and larger amounts of sky glow using these bluer light sources. Still, it seems clear that the high-pressure sodium lamp is on its way out. Advancements in LED technology are happening at a breakneck pace. Just 10 years ago, they weren't seen as viable. But today, even the least efficient of LED replacements ends up meeting the efficiency of high-pressure sodium when scotopic light output is considered. As it stands in 2018, we are faced with the choice of efficiency over aesthetics. I'm pretty sure I'd enjoy roadways lit with relatively warm 3000K LEDs, and these also wouldn't disrupt sleep much. But you can save a lot more energy and potentially have safer roadways with 5700K lighting. Either way, it seems clear that LED technology will very soon overtake the tried and true high-pressure sodium lamp, just as the HPS lamp itself replaced the mercury vapor lamp. And in 40 or 50 years, who knows what technology might light our roadways.
Before we come to our conclusion on outdoor lighting, there are two more factors to consider here that often get left out of the equation. Similar to Luminaire dirt depreciation, the aging of our eyes is a critical factor left out of most lighting policy. As our eyes age, the lens darkens and takes on a yellow hue. This yellowing of the lens alters the spectral transmission of our vision as bluer light becomes blocked by a yellow lens. By the age of 50, our eyes can lose over half of their sensitivity to blue light compared to the eyes of someone who is 25. Fast forward to 65, and these losses can exceed 80% at the far end of the blue spectrum. Yellow and amber light is largely unaffected by this yellowing of the lens. The second factor to consider is the ecological impact of light pollution, something we began to review earlier. Daily rhythms are not the only rhythm reliant on blue light. Circannual rhythms play an important role across the animal kingdom, as well as plant life. Circannual rhythms give organisms the ability to know what time of year it is and which season is approaching based on the changing length of days and nights. This biological clock dictates a wide variety of behaviors, including reproduction, foraging habits, migration, and thermoregulation. During a series of studies on the social vole, a common species of rodent, two groups of rodents were placed in outdoor caged habitats. The first group was only exposed to natural light, while a second group had their biological dark period interrupted by exposure to white artificial light. Not only was the first group more successful both in feeding and reproduction, but many rodents within the second group froze to death once winter arrived. Disrupted by artificial light, their biological clock was unable to direct thermoregulation based on the approaching winter, leading to hypothermia. Birds are also impacted by exposure to artificial light at night. One species studied in Alberta was found to lay eggs out of season when its habitat was illuminated during the night. In a European study, the nesting activity of birds was observed. It was found that some birds were repelled by artificial light, while others were attracted to it. This led to a significant change in the distribution of bird nests, with some birds competing for space next to illuminated highways. Other species, such as the common porwheel and zooplankton, rely on lunar cycles to dictate feeding behaviors. Species that rely on the dim, bluish light of the moon are at an even greater risk for light pollution impacts, as light pollution can match the brightness of moonlight deep into their habitat. The most impacted species, however, are insects. Unlike human vision that can see from violet to red, the spectral sensitivity of insects ranges from ultraviolet to greenish-yellow. Insects are often attracted to outdoor sources of light, losing their adaptation to the darkness. These insects become trapped within a bubble of light until death by exhaustion or predation. Similar to the rodents examined earlier, Many species of insects lose their seasonal clock after consistent exposure to artificial light at night. These insects are unable to survive the winter. Even more vulnerable, nocturnal insects rely on a dark period to conduct important activities such as feeding and reproduction. This was studied in a field experiment that began in 2014 with the goal of better understanding nocturnal pollination. Insect visits and the overall fruitfulness of plants were measured in areas with and without artificial lighting. It was found that illuminated plants received 62% less visits by nocturnal pollinators, leading to a 13% reduction in their produced fruit. Additionally, the activity of daytime pollinators was unable to compensate for the loss in nocturnal pollination. This makes blue-rich light pollution a potential threat to our food supply that relies on pollination. Several studies on nocturnal insect activities under different types of outdoor lighting have taken place. It has been consistently recorded that beneficial behaviors of insects, such as pollination and reproduction, are inhibited by bluer sources of lighting. Adjacently, harmful insect behaviors such as light trapping are greatly increased under bluer sources of lighting such as white LEDs. To summarize, light pollution causes a wide range of damage to Earth's ecosystems that we have only briefly reviewed in this video. Additionally, the amount of biologically toxic light entering the environment has exponentially increased with the transition to LED lighting. With these issues reviewed, we can finally arrive at a conclusion, starting with visibility and safety. Based on extensive research of visual performance under different spectrums of lighting, in conjunction with our understanding of visual adaptation, the photopic curve should be used when implementing outdoor lighting in virtually all situations. Our focal vision, responsible for the majority of visual tasks, is defined solely by the photopic curve. Scotopic vision, mediated by highly sensitive rod cells, cannot be considered reliable in our artificially illuminated nighttime world. Additionally, any benefits possible with scotopic vision are situational and don't represent many of the visual tasks that drivers need to perform. A similar conclusion is reached when considering glare. Bluer sources of light are responsible for increased levels of both discomfort and disability glare, leading to significantly reduced visibility at night. Yellow-amber light becomes even more favorable when considering the aging of our eyes, a process which reduces the transmission of bluer light onto our retina. Based on these three factors of visibility and safety, yellow-amber light provides the best possible results. In terms of biology and ecology, a wide range of negative impacts are the result of light pollution. Blue light, responsible for directing biological rhythms, becomes toxic to organisms at night. Its disruption of important behaviors and biological functions is harmful to animals and humans alike. For some species, this disruption can be fatal. Red light is ideal for avoiding biological damage, but lacks visual efficiency. Amber light is close to the peak sensitivity of cone cells and greatly limits ecological damage. It is the best choice possible without compromising visual performance. With the advantages of yellow-amber light becoming clear, what sort of lighting should be used outdoors at night? As Alec has stated, LEDs become less efficient as they become warmer and emit less blue light. Yellow-amber LEDs are yet to surpass the efficiency of sodium lighting, making them unappealing. Something to consider here are the inverse relationships between wattage and efficiency when comparing LEDs to sodium lighting. Sodium lights become more efficient at higher wattages due to the heat that is required to vaporize their light-emitting metal. LEDs, on the other hand, are sensitive to temperature. Too much heat reduces their efficiency and lifespan. Due to this sensitivity to heat, LED systems generally lose efficiency at higher wattages. With these factors in mind, a split system should be considered. Applications that require lower levels of luminance, such as residential roads, could make use of yellow-amber LEDs. Areas that require more light, such as freeways and industrial sites, could still use sodium lighting with great efficiency. One final thing to consider is fixture design. As we reviewed, light intensity is a measure of light volume divided by area. Contrary to the preferences of lighting operators, bigger is better when it comes to fixtures. Light fixtures should be designed to soften the individual LEDs into a single uniform source of light. This design greatly reduces discomfort glare and the potential for retinal damage caused by high-intensity light. Research has consistently shown that uniform LED light fixtures are preferred over naked LED fixtures that leave viewers exposed to their full visual intensity. Many are hesitant to do this, however, as a diffusing lens would scatter light randomly. One possibility is to use both a diffusing lens and a refractive lens. A diffusing lens would soften the individual LEDs into a larger source of light that is easier on the eyes. A flat refractive lens, such as those found on traffic lights, would then direct this light into a desired area while further reducing its intensity. Another advantage of this design is that the luminance pattern of a fixture could be modified simply by adjusting or changing the refractive lens. In conclusion, a mix of sodium lighting and yellow-amber LEDs should be used to illuminate our nighttime world. This would optimize visual performance while minimizing glare and ecological damage. Light fixtures should be carefully designed to reduce their visual intensity for the comfort of our eyes. The rushed transition we have seen to high-intensity LED streetlights rich in blue light is the result of reckless marketing and greenwashing. Not only has this transition reduced visibility in our nighttime world, but it has done the exact opposite of being environmentally friendly. Those in charge of outdoor lighting need to be careful not to base their decisions off of marketing from the lighting industry. Instead, they should refer to the extensive peer-reviewed research that has been conducted on this issue.